All right, so we're going deep today into a case that I know all of you true crime fans out there are going to find fascinating.
Yeah.
The story of Anthony and Nathaniel Cook,
Oh, okay.
two brothers, who became notorious serial killers in Toledo, Ohio, back in the late 70s and early 80s.
Right.
And we're going to be looking at a Wikipedia article today that details their crimes, how they were caught, and the controversial aftermath that's still making headlines even today.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
pretty crazy stuff. So
What really strikes you about this case is how long they operated under the radar.
Yeah.
They're linked to at least 9 rape murders.
yeah,
And their methods were just brutal.
9 confirmed victims, but who knows how many more. That's what I was thinking. Like, it's terrifying to think
Right.
about. What really stood out to me was how they targeted mostly young couples.
Right.
You know, imagine just out on a date and suddenly you're facing these armed men forcing you into your own car.
It's a chilling thought. And it's I think it's fascinating from a psychological standpoint, the way they used the victims' vehicles.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about transportation, right?
Mhm.
It was about exerting
Right.
complete control, stripping away
Yeah.
any sense of
Ah.
safety and security.
Oh, totally.
They were turning a symbol of freedom, right?
Yeah.
Like their own car,
Yeah.
into a tool of terror.
You're right. That level of calculated cruelty
Yeah.
is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And then they drive these couples to secluded locations. And, well, the details are pretty gruesome. Shooting, stabbing, bludgeoning.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the fear that gripped Toledo back then.
Yeah. There's one case in particular that really stands out for its sheer brutality.
Yeah.
Dawn Renee Bax,
Oh, yeah.
only 12 years old, lured into a car,
Yeah.
taken to an abandoned theater,
Yeah.
and murdered with a brick.
Horrible.
It's heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking and truly horrifying. It's hard to fathom what could drive someone to commit such an act. But for a while, the Cook brothers were ghosts.
Right.
The police had no idea who was behind these murders.
Yeah. Then came a turning point. In September 1981,
Okay.
Anthony Cook attempted to rape a young woman named Leslie Sawicki.
Okay.
She managed to escape and call for help, both the police and her father.
And sadly, her father, Peter Sawicki, arrived at the scene before the police and was shot and killed by Anthony Cook.
Right.
A tragic consequence of trying to protect his daughter.
A devastating loss.
Yeah.
But this act ultimately led to Anthony's arrest.
Oh, okay.
They found his fingerprints at the scene, and information from street informants pointed to him as well.
So they finally have Anthony in custody, but did anyone believe that he was only responsible for Peter Sawicki's death?
Right, at that point.
Yeah.
The other murders remained unsolved.
Yeah.
The technology for DNA testing was still in its early stages.
Yeah.
And there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to those crimes.
Okay.
So in 1982,
Yeah.
he's convicted of Peter Sawicki's murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Wow.
It seemed like the case was closed, but there were still
Yeah.
so many unanswered questions.
And then years later, in 1998, there's this seemingly unrelated event that cracks the case wide open. Nathaniel Cook is arrested for a misdemeanor.
Uh-huh.
What happened then?
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
During the standard booking process, they take a blood sample
Yeah.
from Nathaniel.
Okay.
Now remember, this is the late 90s,
Right.
and DNA technology is advancing rapidly.
Yeah.
Law enforcement starts to see the potential of DNA evidence in solving cold cases.
So they had a blood sample from Nathaniel the whole time?
Right.
Why didn't they test it earlier?
Well, DNA testing wasn't widely used
Right.
in criminal investigations back in the early 80s.
Right.
It was a relatively new field,
Yeah.
and the technology was expensive and time-consuming.
Okay.
It wasn't until the mid-90s
Yeah.
that DNA testing became more commonplace.
That makes sense. So they finally test Nathaniel's blood in 1998, and what do they find?
The results were undeniable. Nathaniel's DNA linked him to several
Yeah.
of the unsolved murders.
Wow.
And because they're brothers,
Yeah.
they knew Anthony had to be involved as well.
Wow, what a breakthrough. So what happened next? Did they immediately go after Anthony in prison?
They did.
Yeah.
And it led to a series of plea deals. Nathaniel confessed to participating in 3 murders, while Anthony admitted to 8,
Jeez.
including those linked to Nathaniel by DNA evidence.
Okay.
He even confessed to a 9th murder that was previously unconnected to the others.
What?
The killing of Vicki Lynn Small. back in 1973.
It's almost unbelievable that he admitted to another murder on top of everything else.
Right.
So at this point, the Cook brothers' reign of terror is finally brought to an end. But what about justice for the victims' families? They had to wait years for answers.
Absolutely. Their pain and frustration must have been unimaginable. They lived with the uncertainty of not knowing who was responsible for the loss of their loved ones for so long.
Yeah.
This case really highlights how advancements in technology like DNA testing can change the landscape of criminal investigations.
It makes you wonder how many other cold cases could be solved with the technology we have today.
It's a thought-provoking point.
Yeah.
There are likely many families still searching for answers, and DNA testing offers a glimmer of hope for them. But the Cook brothers' story doesn't end there. There's another layer we need to explore, the theory of racial motivation.
Now, this is where the case takes another turn.
Right.
Retired Detective Tom Ross, who worked on the case, believes the brothers specifically targeted white victims.
Right.
All of their confirmed victims were white, while the Cook brothers are black. It's a disturbing element that adds another dimension to the horror of their crimes.
Yeah.
Investigating potential motives in any crime, especially one as complex as this, is crucial to understanding the full picture. I can't imagine the added pain and anger the victims' families must have felt if this theory is true. But let's fast forward a bit to 2015. Anthony Cook, still serving his life sentence, files for parole.
Okay.
And he was denied. The parole board told him he couldn't even apply again until 2025. But then, in 2018, Nathaniel Cook, who had received a 75-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 20 years, also filed for parole.
Right.
Wait, they were actually considering releasing him. The man who confessed to being involved in multiple murders, what were they thinking?
It was a highly controversial decision, and there was a huge public outcry. Victims' families vehemently opposed his release. They felt that he should serve his full sentence, considering the brutality of his crimes.
I can only imagine their outrage. This man took part in taking innocent lives. But what happened? Did the court listen to the families?
Unfortunately, they didn't. The court, citing the plea deal and the agreement made with the judge back in 2000, granted Nathaniel's parole.
You're kidding. They actually laid him out. After all that, this has to be some kind of mistake, right?
He was released in August of 2018, but with very strict conditions.
Okay.
He was required to participate in rehabilitation programs for sex offenders, wear a GPS bracelet, and stay away from children.
Those conditions seem inadequate, like a slap in the face to the victims' families. How can they be expected to feel safe knowing he's out there?
It's definitely a complex situation. The justice system has to try to balance punishment with the possibility of rehabilitation.
Yeah.
But in a case like this, it's difficult to imagine how someone who committed such horrific acts could ever truly be rehabilitated.
And what about the risk to the community? Is anyone truly safe with him out on the streets?
That's the most unsettling part. In 2019, it came out that Nathaniel Cook was living just 200 meters from a school in Toledo.
200 meters from a school? How is that even possible with the restrictions placed on him?
There were investigations, of course.
Yeah.
The police looked into whether he was violating the terms of his parole, but they ultimately determined that he wasn't breaking any rules. He was allowed to stay.
This is unbelievable. I'm already feeling uneasy, and we've only just scratched the surface of this case.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And it raises some serious questions about how we define justice, the effectiveness of parole systems, and the ongoing debate about rehabilitation versus public safety.
Those are definitely questions worth exploring further. We've uncovered a lot of disturbing information, and it's clear that this case is far more complex than it appears on the surface.
Yeah, it's unsettling to think that someone capable of such monstrous acts is now living so close to a school.
Right.
It feels like a system failure,
Yeah.
prioritizing a convicted killer's rights
Right.
over the safety of innocent children.
It certainly raises questions about the effectiveness of parole systems.
Yeah.
And that delicate balance between rehabilitation and public safety.
Yeah, where do we draw the line?
Right.
How do we ensure the well-being of the community while also upholding, the principles of our justice system?
Yeah, it's a tough question with no easy answers. But before we get too deep into that, I want to circle back to the Cook brothers' MO for a moment.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier how they used their victims' vehicles as a tool of terror.
Right.
The source material describes them targeting young couples, forcing them into their own cars at gunpoint.
Uh-huh.
There's something incredibly chilling about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It speaks to a level of premeditation
Yeah.
and control that is frankly terrifying.
Yeah.
They weren't simply acting on impulse.
Right.
They were actively seeking out victims,
Yeah.
orchestrating these attacks,
Yeah.
and manipulating the very environment that should have provided their victims with a sense of security.
Right.
They were turning.
It's like they were stealing more than just lives. They were
Yeah.
stealing their victims'
Yes.
sense of agency, their control over their own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
That moment when they were forced into their own vehicle
Yeah.
must have been utterly terrifying.
Yes, that transition from a place of comfort and familiarity, right?
Yeah.
Their own car.
Yeah.
Into a mobile prison.
Yeah.
A vehicle for their own demise must have been psychologically devastating.
Totally.
It underscores the depth of their cruelty and the calculated nature of their crimes.
It makes you wonder what drove them to commit such horrific acts. Was it a combination of nature and nurture?
Right.
Were they born with a predisposition to violence, or were their actions shaped by their environment and experiences?
That's a question that has plagued criminologists and psychologists for centuries.
Right.
This age-old debate of nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
And in cases like this, it's almost impossible to disentangle the two.
Right.
There are often a multitude of factors at play.
Right.
Genetics, childhood trauma, societal influences, mental illness.
Right.
It's rarely a simple equation.
I'd be curious to know more about the Cook brothers' upbringing.
Yeah.
Were there any red flags, any early signs of violence or antisocial behavior that might shed light on their path to becoming serial killers?
Unfortunately, the Wikipedia article doesn't delve deeply into their childhood.
Oh.
It mentions they were born in Mobile, Alabama before moving to Toledo, Ohio.
Okay.
But there aren't many details beyond that.
I wonder if there's more information available in other sources like court documents or psychological evaluations.
Right.
It would be fascinating to understand their formative years, their family dynamics,
Yeah.
and any significant events that may have contributed to their development.
I agree, those seemingly mundane details.
Right.
The nuances of their upbringing, their relationships, their struggles,
Yeah.
those are often the missing pieces that help us paint a more complete picture of who they were
Yeah.
and what might have led them down such a dark path.
It's a reminder that even the most horrific criminals were once children shaped by a complex web of experiences and influences.
Oh.
And while it's crucial to hold them accountable for their actions, I think it's equally important to try to understand the factors that contributed to their descent into darkness.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
It's not about excusing their actions,
Right.
but about seeking a deeper understanding of the human condition.
Right. Even in its darkest manifestations.
Totally.
Knowledge, even about the most disturbing aspects of human nature,
Right.
can be a powerful tool for prevention and intervention.
Well said. And speaking of knowledge, I wanted to touch on something we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Anthony Cook's confession to a ninth murder unconnected to the Toledo series,
Right.
the murder of Vicki Lynn Small in 1973.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that confession?
That detail is particularly chilling because it suggests that the Cook brothers' reign of terror may have begun much earlier than we initially thought.
Yeah.
It's like a hidden chapter in their story,
Right.
a prologue to the horrors that would unfold in the years to come.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new line of inquiry.
It does make you wonder if there were other victims,
Oh.
other unsolved cases that could be linked back to them.
Yeah.
Are there families out there who still don't have answers, who may one day find a connection to the Cook brothers? It's certainly a possibility. Cold cases are often revisited with fresh eyes, new technology and information from unexpected sources.
Right.
Perhaps one day we'll learn the full extent of their crimes.
It's a sobering thought,
Yeah.
but it also underscores the importance of never giving up hope, of continuing to seek justice for victims,
Yeah.
no matter how much time has passed.
That's a powerful message. Justice delayed is not always justice denied.
Right.
And even in the darkest of cases,
Yeah.
there's always a glimmer of hope, a possibility that the truth will eventually prevail.
I like that, like a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
It's what keeps us going, keeps us searching for answers and fighting for a better, safer world.
Absolutely.
But for now, let's shift our focus back to Nathaniel Cook's current situation.
Okay.
You mentioned he was released on parole in 2018 with a number of restrictions,
Right.
including staying away from children.
Right. And as we discussed, that restriction became a major point of contention
Right.
when it was revealed that he was living just 200 meters from a school.
Yes, that was a major red flag for many people,
Yeah.
including myself.
Just
It
that.
felt like a system failure.
Yeah.
Like the justice system was prioritizing the rights of a convicted killer over the safety and well-being of innocent children.
It definitely sparked a lot of debate
Yeah.
and raised serious questions about the effectiveness of our parole systems and
Yeah.
the challenges of reintegrating violent offenders back into society.
Right.
How do we balance the need for rehabilitation
Yeah.
with the imperative to protect the public?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but I think it's a debate that needs to continue.
Right.
We need to find a way to hold offenders accountable for their actions
Oh.
while also providing genuine opportunities for rehabilitation and a safe reintegration into society.
I couldn't agree more. It's about finding a balance,
Yeah.
a way to protect the community while also acknowledging the possibility of change and redemption.
And while we're grappling with these difficult questions, it's important to remember the victims and their families. They are the ones who have suffered the most, who continue to bear the scars of the Cook brothers' horrific crimes.
Their pain and loss are immeasurable, and their voices deserve to be heard.
Yeah.
We must never forget the human cost of these crimes, the ripple effects that continue to impact families and communities.
It's also important to acknowledge the bravery of the survivors like Leslie Sawicki, who fought back against their attackers and helped bring them to justice.
Yes.
Their courage is an inspiration.
Their resilience is a testament to the strength of the human spirit
Yeah.
and its ability to overcome even the most traumatic experiences.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, but it's also left me feeling deeply disturbed.
Right.
The Cook brothers' crimes were so calculated, so brutal.
Yeah.
It's hard to comprehend the level of darkness that existed within them.
It's natural to feel a range of emotions when confronting such harrowing cases.
Yeah.
Sadness, anger, confusion.
Right.
But it's important to remember that even in the face of such darkness,
Yeah.
there are glimmers of hope, stories of resilience,
Yeah.
and individuals who are working tirelessly to make our world a safer place.
You're right. We can't let the darkness consume us. We
Well-
have to keep searching for the light, keep believing in the possibility of a better future.
And that brings us to a crucial question.
Okay.
What happens next?
Yeah.
What lessons can we learn from the Cook brothers case?
Right.
How can we use this knowledge to prevent future tragedies?
That's what I want to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right.
We've uncovered the horrors of the past, but now it's time to look towards the future.
Yeah.
To consider what we can do to create a world where such atrocities are less likely to occur.
Yeah, it's a heavy question to consider. How do we prevent future tragedies? It feels like trying to stop a runaway train, especially after diving deep into a case as dark as the Cook brothers.
Right.
Where do we even begin?
It's a challenge, no doubt, but I think a crucial starting point is early intervention.
Okay.
We need to be more aware of the warning signs,
Right.
the red flags that might indicate a predisposition to violence.
And be ready to act.
You're talking about things like childhood trauma exposure to violence at a young age, or even patterns of antisocial behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those factors, while not guarantees of future violence,
Right.
can increase the risk.
Yeah.
Recognizing them early on
Mhm.
and providing the right kind of support,
Yeah.
whether it's counseling, therapy, or social services,
Right.
could make a real difference.
It's like trying to catch a falling star.
Yeah.
It's difficult, maybe even impossible to stop every tragedy. But if we can identify those at risk and give them the tools they need to make different choices,
Right.
perhaps we can alter their trajectory, nudge them away from a path of violence.
I like that analogy. It highlights the delicate nature of intervention and the need for a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
And it speaks to a larger point. Crime prevention isn't just about law enforcement and punishment.
Right.
It's about addressing the root causes,
Yeah.
the societal factors that contribute to violence.
So we're talking about things like poverty, systemic inequality, lack of access to education and opportunity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We need to create a society where everyone feels valued,
Right.
supported, and empowered to make positive choices.
Yeah.
A society where people have access to the resources they need to thrive, not just survive.
It's a tall order changing the fabric of society, but I think it's a goal worth striving for.
Yeah.
If we want to truly reduce violence, we need to address these systemic issues head on. We owe it to ourselves, to our communities, to future generations to create a world where violence isn't the default answer to hardship.
I couldn't agree more. It's about fostering a culture of empathy,
Yeah.
compassion, and respect for human life,
Yeah.
starting from the ground up, and that starts with each of us.
What do you mean by that? How can individuals make a difference in something as vast as societal change?
It's about the ripple effect. Small acts of kindness.
Yeah.
Understanding and support within our own circles can spread outwards. It's about challenging harmful attitudes and beliefs, even in casual conversations.
Right.
It's about being willing to have those difficult discussions about inequality,
Yeah.
prejudice, and the systems that perpetuate violence.
So it's not just about grand gestures or sweeping policy
Yeah,
changes. It's
sure.
about cultivating a more empathetic and just society, starting in our own homes and communities.
Exactly. It's about changing hearts and minds one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
It might seem like a drop in the ocean, but remember, even the smallest ripple can eventually reach the shore.
That's a beautiful way to put it. This deep dive into the Cook brothers case has been a harrowing journey. Their crimes were so horrific, so senseless.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the darkness.
Right.
But you're right, amidst all that darkness, there's also a glimmer of hope.
Hope is what keeps us going, what fuels our desire to learn from these tragedies
Right.
and work towards a better future. We've explored the depths of human cruelty in this case, but we've also touched upon the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of change.
And to our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring this case, to dig deeper into the complexities of the justice system, the factors that contribute to violence, and the ongoing debate about rehabilitation and public safety.
Knowledge is power. By understanding the darkness, we can better illuminate the path towards a brighter future.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.